Let me share something with you today that might make both of us a little uncomfortable. I want to tell you about a moment from my childhood that shaped years of my life in ways I never expected. Sometimes the most important conversations are the ones that make us squirm a little. Bear with me as I take you back to a time when everything changed. Picture this: I was just a kid, maybe 10 or 11 years old, living in a world very different from today. Back then, you couldn't just pull out a phone and access anything you wanted with a few taps. The internet wasn't in everyone's pocket. If you encountered certain types of adult content, it usually happened by accident across a forgotten magazine in the woods, or discovering something hidden in someone's home that was never meant for young eyes. I had this friend, let's call him Marcus. One day at school, Marcus pulled me aside with this look of absolute amazement on his face. His eyes were wide, and he was practically bursting with the need to tell me something. He leaned in close and whispered that he had found something unbelievable at his house, something his father had hidden away. He asked if I wanted to come over after school to see what he had discovered. I remember that afternoon so clearly. Even though decades have passed, I didn't walk home that day. I actually ran. My heart was pounding, partly from the physical exertion, but mostly from curiosity and anticipation. When I got to Marcus's house, he showed me what he had found. I remember my first thought was simply shock mixed with fascination. My mind was trying to process what I was seeing, these images that seemed both forbidden and magnetic at the same time. What happened in my body and mind in that moment wasn't something I had chosen or planned. It was automatic, a rush of chemicals and sensations that left me feeling exhilarated and terrified all at once. There was this electric feeling, lightning running through my nervous system, a thrill that I had never experienced before. My heart raced faster, and everything seemed heightened and intense. But almost immediately after that initial rush came something else entirely. Guilt crashed over me like a wave. Shame wrapped itself around my chest and made it hard to breathe. I felt like I had crossed some invisible line, broken some unspoken rule, and there was no going back. The worst part came when I walked through my front door later that evening. My mother greeted me with her usual warmth, me how much she loved me, asking about my day with genuine care in her eyes. All I could think was that I had done something terribly wrong, that I was somehow fundamentally changed, that if she knew what I had seen, she would be devastated. That experience at such a young age planted something in my mind. It started what I can only describe as an internal war. Part of me wanted to seek out that feeling again, rush of excitement and forbidden pleasure. But another part of me was screaming that this was wrong, that I needed to stay away. Pursuing those feelings would lead me down a dark path. This conflict would rage inside me for years to come. Now, I'm speaking to you today as someone who believes we all have warrior spirits inside us. Whether you think of yourself that way or not, there's something in you that wants to fight for what matters, that wants to protect people you care about, that wants to make a difference in this world. You have purposes to fulfill, relationships to nurture, and meaningful work to accomplish. Inside every single one of us is this capacity for courage, for standing up when things get difficult, for pushing forward even when we're afraid. But here's what I've learned through years of working with people. listening to their stories. When I work with people and wrestling with my own struggles, we have a very real adversary in this spiritual battle we're engaged in. This enemy doesn't want you living out your purpose. This enemy wants to distract you, discourage you, wear you down, and take you out of the fight entirely. And one of the most effective weapons this enemy uses against people who want to do good in the world is the battle that happens in the mind, particularly around the issue of sexual temptation and the use of explicit material. That's why I want to talk with you today about developing a strategy for this specific battle. Every warrior going into combat needs a plan. You wouldn't send soldiers into the field without training, without understanding the terrain, without knowing where the dangers lie. The same principle applies here. We need a clear, practical battle plan for dealing with this area of struggle. Let me share some realities with you that might surprise you. Research shows that among people who identify as followers of faith, who genuinely love God and want to live according to spiritual principles, a significant majority of men struggle with viewing explicit content regularly. The statistics suggest that roughly 2 out of every 3 men deal with this issue on at least a monthly basis. Women face this battle too, historically at lower rates. However, the numbers among women have been climbing steadily, often for different underlying reasons than men. For younger adults, those between 18 and 30, the statistics become even more stark. Nearly 4 out of every 5 young men in this age range, even those with strong faith commitments, find them selling this type of content regularly. These aren't just numbers on a page. These represent real human beings fighting real battles, often in silence and isolation, feeling like they're the only ones struggling while everyone around them seems to have it all together. What do these numbers tell us? They tell us that we desperately need practical strategies to address this issue. We need to understand how to fight effectively so that we can actually live out the purposes we were created for, rather than getting stuck in cycles of behavior that leave us feeling defeated and discouraged. Let me take you into a story from ancient times, a narrative that has been told for thousands of years. There was once a king, a man renowned for his courage in battle, his skill with words and music, his deep spiritual sensitivity. Historical records devoted hundreds and hundreds of accounts to describing this man's life and accomplishments. He wrote poetry that people still read today. He was a gifted musician whose songs touched hearts. He led his nation with wisdom and strength. He was an absolutely brilliant military strategist and a fearless fighter. And yet, despite all these remarkable qualities, this man is often remembered primarily for something described in just 3 brief passages out of all those hundreds of accounts about his life. Think about that for a moment. Hundreds of passages praising his achievements, his character, his contributions, and yet what many people recall first when they hear his name is a failure described in just 3 short sections. Let me set the scene for you. The narrative begins by telling us that during the season when kings typically went off to war, when military campaigns were normally conducted, this particular king made a decision. He sent his army out to battle under the command of his generals, but he himself stayed home. This is significant. He wasn't where he was supposed to be. He had abdicated his responsibility to lead from the front, choosing comfort and safety over duty and engagement. One evening, unable to sleep, the king got up from his bed and walked out onto the rooftop of his palace. As he looked out over the city, his eyes fell upon a woman bathing. The text tells us she was extremely beautiful. Now, the king did what anyone else might have done initially. He inquired about her identity, informed him that she was the wife of one of his soldiers, a man who was currently out fighting in the very battle the king should have been leading. Despite knowing she was married, despite understanding that her husband was away serving in his army, the king sent messengers to bring her to the palace. She came, slept with her. This brief encounter, described in just a few sentences, set in motion a cascade of devastating consequences. The woman became pregnant. In an attempt to cover up what he had done, the king made a series of increasingly terrible decisions that ultimately led to the death of an innocent man and brought immeasurable pain to countless people. A man celebrated for his heart, his courage, his spiritual depth, remembered for 3 passages that describe a profound moral failure. How did this happen? What can we learn from examining this ancient story? When we break it down carefully, we see a pattern that repeats itself over and over in the lives of good people who end up in terrible situations. First, this warrior wasn't where he was supposed to be. He had disengaged from his primary calling. Because he wasn't engaged in the battles he should have been fighting, he became vulnerable to temptations he should have been able to resist. When we're not actively pursuing our purposes, when we've checked out from the meaningful work we're called to do, we become easy targets for destructive patterns. Second, because he wasn't where he was supposed to be, he saw something he shouldn't have seen. His position on that rooftop at that particular time created an opportunity for temptation. Third, seeing led to action. He did something he wasn't supposed to do. And fourth, his actions cost him and many others things they should never have had to lose. Lives were destroyed, trust was shattered, families were torn apart, and his own legacy was forever tarnished. It all started when he wasn't where he was supposed to be. The king, during wartime, when leaders were expected to be with their troops to stay back at the palace. This is a crucial point. When do so many of us find ourselves most vulnerable to destructive patterns? It's when we're disengaged from our God-given purposes. When we're not actively fighting the battles we're meant to fight, pursuing the work we're meant to pursue, protecting the people we're meant to protect. This warrior should have been leading his troops, inspiring his soldiers, making strategic decisions on the battlefield. Instead, he was home, restless, bored, disconnected from his purpose. And that disconnection created space for temptation to take root. Let me tell you what I know about many of you based on years of walking alongside people through their struggles. Your story probably contains elements of what I'm about to describe. The details will vary, but the basic pattern is remarkably common. At some point in your life, likely when you were young, you were exposed to something sexually explicit or experienced something sexual in a context that wasn't healthy or appropriate. Maybe it was similar to my experience stumbling across explicit material as a child. Maybe it was far worse. Maybe someone you trusted violated that trust, abused you, stole your innocence through their selfish actions. Maybe you were on a date with someone and the situation escalated beyond what you intended, and before you fully understood what was happening, you were involved in sexual activity you hadn't planned on. Whatever the specific circumstances, significant happened in that moment or moments. You were wounded. Now, you might not have recognized it as a wound at the time. You might have just felt confused, excited, guilty, scared, or some complex mixture of emotions. But make no mistake, inside you was injured in that moment. You were wounded emotionally. The experience affected how you think about relationships, intimacy, and yourself. You were wounded mentally. The images or experiences became embedded in your thought patterns, influencing how your mind works. You were wounded spiritually. Your understanding of the sacred nature of sexuality, how physical intimacy connects to emotional and spiritual intimacy, was distorted. Think of it like a computer virus. A virus infects a computer system. It doesn't just affect one file or one program. It spreads through the system, corrupting data, changing how things function, creating problems in areas that seem unrelated to the initial infection point. That's what happens when we experience sexual trauma or premature sexual exposure. The wound doesn't stay contained. It spreads and affects multiple areas of our lives. After that wound occurred, you couldn't look at human sexuality the same way anymore. The beautiful gift of physical intimacy that was designed for a specific context, the sacred bond between committed partners, sexual union is meant to reflect deeper spiritual realities. All of that became distorted. You lost some of your innocence. Your thought life became compromised. A war began raging inside you. Here's how that internal war typically plays out. Part of you is attracted to the thrill of sexual experiences or images outside their proper context. There's a genuine biochemical response that happens. Your brain releases dopamine and other chemicals that create feelings of pleasure and excitement. This isn't imaginary. It's a real physiological response. And because it feels good in the moment, part of you wants to experience it again. But then comes the aftermath. Shame washes over you. Guilt grips your heart. You feel disgusted with yourself. You wonder what's wrong with you. Why you can't just stop. Why something that feels exciting in the moment leaves you feeling so terrible afterward. This emotional roller coaster becomes exhausting. Often because you feel embarrassed or ashamed. You don't tell anyone what you're going through. You keep the struggle private. You hide it. And here's a crucial truth. Destructive patterns always grow most effectively in darkness and isolation. When we hide our struggles, when we refuse to bring them into the light, when we try to handle everything on our own, we give those patterns maximum power over us. Do many people do? They start minimizing the issue. They tell themselves it's not really that big of a deal, that lots of people do the same thing, that there are worse behaviors they could be engaged in. They rationalize and justify. Or if they're spiritually inclined, they pray desperately for the desire to go away. They beg God to simply remove the temptation, take away the urges, to make them pure without any effort on their part. But the desire doesn't disappear. Pray more and make promises. They swear to themselves and to God that they'll never do it again. And sometimes they actually succeed in abstaining for a period of time. 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 months. In rare cases, even 3 years. They experience what we might call periods of sobriety, stretches where they manage to avoid the behavior they're trying to stop. But then something happens. Stress builds up, loneliness hits hard, an opportunity presents itself. Defenses are down, fall back into the pattern. Often, once they've broken their streak of abstinence, they go into what you might call a binge period. It's similar to what happens with dieting. Someone restricts their eating carefully, then has one cookie and suddenly thinks, well, I've already blown it, so I might as well eat the whole box. That same psychology applies here. Once the barrier is broken, there's often a period of excessive indulgence before the guilt returns and the cycle starts over. Many people convince themselves that their problem will automatically resolve itself when life circumstances change. Single people think that once they get married, all their struggles with lust and explicit content will disappear. They imagine that having a spouse and a healthy sexual relationship will satisfy all their desires and eliminate any temptation to look elsewhere. But then they get married and they discover that the problem doesn't go away. Why? Because while they thought they were just dealing with a lust issue, they were actually dealing with something deeper. They were dealing with an unhealed wound. You can't heal a wound just by changing your circumstances. Wounds require actual treatment, actual healing processes, actual work to address the underlying damage. Ancient king in our story fell into his moral failure because he wasn't where he was supposed to be. He saw something he wasn't supposed to see. He did something he wasn't supposed to do. And he was vulnerable in ways he probably didn't recognize until it was too late. When our warriors most vulnerable, share a few key times. First, we're vulnerable whenever we become overconfident. When you start thinking that you don't have a problem, that you're strong enough to handle any temptation, that you don't need to be careful, that's often precisely when you're most at risk. Imagine the king thinking to himself, it's wartime, and I know I should be with the army, but my generals are capable. We have superior numbers. They don't really need me there. I can stay back and relax. I've earned a break. That overconfidence created an opening for disaster. There's ancient wisdom that warns us about this. It essentially says that if you think you're standing firm, if you believe you're secure and invulnerable, you need to be extremely careful because that's when you're most likely to fall. Overconfidence blinds us to real dangers. I used to struggle with overconfidence at times in my own life. I wanted so desperately to be free from sexual temptation that I would pray for God to simply remove all inappropriate thoughts from my mind. I would ask for a miracle that make me completely immune to lust. And I actually convinced myself at one point that maybe God had answered that prayer, that I had reached some level of spiritual maturity where I was no longer vulnerable. Let me be absolutely clear with you that never happened. I'm always potentially vulnerable. The day I forget, that is the day I become dangerously exposed to attack. I'm a human being with human desires and human weaknesses. I've learned that I need to be constantly honest about my vulnerabilities and constantly wise about managing them. As a spiritual leader, as someone who teaches and guides others, I'm still fundamentally human. Tried to eliminate my human weaknesses through sheer willpower and prayer, and it doesn't work that way. I'm always potentially vulnerable. That's why I've learned to be ruthlessly honest about my weaknesses and proactively wise about protecting myself. When I go into battle, I need to understand that my enemy is going to set traps specifically designed to take me down. I need to be honest about where I'm most vulnerable and wise enough to stay away from those danger zones. This requires self-awareness and intentional planning. What you need to do is become very clear about what triggers your struggles. Situations or circumstances tend to lead you into temptation. When you're scrolling through social media late at night and come across images that start steering your thoughts in unhealthy directions? Is it when you're playing video games alone while everyone else is asleep? Is it when you're traveling for work, staying in hotels, feeling lonely and disconnected? Is it when you're in romantic situations with someone you're attracted to and physical boundaries start getting blurred? Is it when you're reading certain types of fiction that stimulate your imagination in sexual ways? Is it when you're reading articles about sexuality that start taking your mind places it shouldn't go? What triggers you? Warriors, here's a fundamental truth: you're only as strong as you are honest. If you can't be honest with yourself about your vulnerabilities, you'll never develop effective defenses. You must be willing to look clearly at your patterns, to identify your weak points, acknowledge where you consistently struggle. In my own life, knowing that I'm a warrior with a mission from God, I also have to acknowledge that my spiritual enemy will try to stop me and take me out of the battle. Therefore, I've put specific safeguards in place as part of my battle plan, protections designed to make me less vulnerable to attack. Let me share some practical examples from my own life. These are things I do to honor my wife, to honor God, and to honor the calling on my life. First, I don't spend time alone with women in any context outside of public settings. I don't have private meetings in my office with women on one. I don't drive places with women alone in my car. I don't go to restaurants to sit across from women for intimate conversations. I know in many professional contexts, this might seem overly cautious or even old-fashioned, but I don't care. Potential risks far outweigh any inconvenience. Second, I know that I could potentially be vulnerable to accessing inappropriate content online. So I've taken aggressive steps to lock down my devices. My tablet, my phone, my computer, they're all restricted. I've made it so that I literally cannot access certain types of content, even if I wanted to. On my mobile devices, I can't download apps without someone else entering a code. Someone else controls that access. On my social media accounts, there are multiple people who have my passwords. Everything is monitored. I have adult content blocking enabled that I can't override or remove. The system even prevents me from booking certain services that could potentially lead to compromising situations. My computer tracks everything. Multiple accountability partners receive reports of my online activity. Now, you might be thinking, is this really necessary? Are you really that weak and vulnerable? And here's my honest answer: no, not most of the time. Not under normal circumstances. I don't know what 6 months from now looks like. I don't know what emotional state I might be in a year from now. I don't know what circumstances might arise that could make me vulnerable in ways I'm not vulnerable today. Why would I wait to resist a temptation in the future when I have the power to eliminate that temptation today? Would I rely on my future willpower when I can remove the option entirely right now? This is just basic wisdom. Warriors don't go into battle hoping they'll have enough strength to resist in the moment. Warriors eliminate threats before those threats can cause harm. Here's a key question every warrior should ask: why would I postpone dealing with a potential problem until I'm weak and vulnerable when I can address it right now while I'm strong and clear-headed Use your intelligence. Plan ahead. Don't rely on future willpower. Create systems and structures that protect you before you need protection. Warriors are vulnerable when we're overconfident. We're also vulnerable whenever we feel entitled. Think about the king again. Can't you almost hear his internal justification? I'm the king. This job is incredibly stressful. I carry enormous weight and responsibility. My needs aren't being met at home. I deserve a little something on the side. I work so hard. I've earned this. That sense of entitlement opens the door to terrible decisions. For you, entitlement might sound different. Maybe you're not married and you see all your friends engaging in casual sexual relationships. You think, I'm actually being pretty good by not doing that. So viewing some explicit content online isn't really a big deal. It's just my way of releasing tension. I could be doing so much worse. Or maybe you're married to someone who doesn't engage with you emotionally the way you wish they would. Justify seeking emotional or sexual gratification elsewhere. Or maybe your spouse isn't meeting your needs in the bedroom. You convince yourself that you're entitled to get those needs met through other means. The ancient king went up to the rooftop of his palace. It wouldn't have been unusual for people to bathe in their courtyards or on their roofs during that time period and in that culture. You can almost see his thought process. I think I'll go up and get some fresh air, maybe walk around a bit, see what's happening in the city. And he did. And he saw this woman bathing. Now, simply noticing an attractive person isn't a sin. We're human. We have eyes. Attraction is a natural response. But he didn't simply notice her and look away. He stared. The original language used to describe his looking indicates intense, focused gazing. It wasn't a glance. It was sustained, intentional looking. Fixed his eyes on her and kept them there. You might think, so what? He just looked. He didn't touch anyone, actually do anything wrong yet. But here's what a spiritual teacher once said that might sound extreme, but carries profound truth. If you look at someone with lustful intent, you've already committed adultery in your heart. The internal act precedes and predicts the external act. This same teacher made a shocking statement to emphasize the seriousness of this issue. If your eye causes you to sin, you should gouge it out. Now, was he being literal? Thank goodness, no. Can you imagine walking into work and seeing another person with an eye patch and you both just nod at each other knowingly because you both took the teaching literally? That's not the point. The point is, take this seriously, warriors. This battle can sideline you from your calling. It changes the way you think about everything. It distorts your perception of reality. It poisons what should be pure. It turns people into objects for your gratification rather than honoring them as full human beings created in the image of God. It dishonors the sacred nature of sexuality, and it robs you of what you really want, which isn't just physical release, but genuine intimacy, emotional connection, spiritual unity with another person. The guidance for dealing with sexual temptation is different from guidance for dealing with other types of temptation. With many temptations, we're told to stand firm, to resist, to fight. But with sexual temptation, the consistent instruction is to flee. Run. Get out of there. Don't try to test your willpower. Don't see how close you can get to the line without crossing it. When you encounter sexual temptation, you run away as fast as you can. If you encounter a bear in the woods, you don't stand there thinking about all those self-defense classes you took. You run. Sexual temptation is the same. You don't fight it directly. You flee from it. You remove yourself from the situation as quickly as possible. The king wasn't where he was supposed to be. He saw something he wasn't supposed to see. He did something he wasn't supposed to do. And if you're feeling the weight of this message right now, if there's a heaviness in your chest, if part of you is thinking you should have skipped this conversation, if a little voice in your head is saying, don't let anyone know about your struggle, keep it hidden, I want to say something directly to you. Especially to the men, this applies to everyone. Be people of honor. Be people of integrity. Fight for purity. Honor God in everything you do. Tolerating the burden of hidden sin. Aren't you tired of covering your tracks? Aren't you exhausted from wondering when someone is going to discover your secret? Aren't you wary of the emotional distance your hidden behavior creates in your relationships? Aren't you sick of the spiritual drag you feel, the sense that you can't fully represent God or live out your calling because there's this weight holding you back? Eventually, the ancient king reached a point where he had to face what he had done. It took another person, a prophet, confronting him directly before he was willing to be honest. But finally, he confessed. He wrote about it later, and his words have been preserved for thousands of years. He said, finally, I confessed my sins. I stopped trying to hide my guilt. I admitted my rebellion, and God forgave me. All my guilt was gone. I hope you can appreciate the profound grace and mercy available to anyone who's willing to be honest about their struggles. No matter how trapped you feel, no matter how dark your situation seems, there's hope. There's always potential for healing. Let's fight like people who believe that, not like people who've given up and accepted defeat as inevitable. Let's not surrender and justify our destructive patterns. Let's have a clear plan. We're warriors. What's your plan going to be? Let me give you 5 simple but powerful steps. Some of you will implement these steps and experience genuine victory. Step 1, confess to God. The promise is that God is faithful and just to forgive us and purify us from all our sins. That's how good God is. When you bring your failures to Him honestly, He forgives and cleanses you. Step 2, confess to the right people. This is crucial. Ancient wisdom tells us to confess our sins to one another and pray for each other so that we might be healed. Do you see the distinction? We confess to God for forgiveness, but we confess to trusted people for healing. Those are 2 different things. You can be forgiven, but still not be healed. Healing requires community accountability, support from others. How long have you been fighting this battle? If you're not winning, it's almost certainly because you need the right people around you. We weren't designed to fight alone. You need warriors in the battle with you. You need people who will stand with you, encourage you, hold you accountable, call you out when you're making excuses, and pray for you when you're weak. You need more than just a spouse. You need friends, mentors, accountability partners who can speak truth to you and support you in the fight. Step 3, remove the triggers. Be foolish about this. If you keep losing the battle on the same path, get off that path. If the king had come to me for advice, I would have told him very directly, no more evening walks on the rooftop. Period. Remove the triggers. If you know that certain situations consistently lead you into temptation, stop putting yourself in those situations. Step 4, get whatever help you need. Make the phone call. Set up the appointment. Get counseling for yourself or for your marriage. If you need to go to a treatment program, do it. Stop making excuses and take action. Whatever level of help you need, pursue it aggressively. Let the goodness and grace of God heal all your wound. This is the ultimate goal. Not just behavior modification, just white-knuckling your way through temptation, but actual healing of the underlying wound that makes you vulnerable in the first place. Will this be an easy battle? Absolutely not. You may fight this battle your entire life, but with spiritual strength, with community support, practical strategies, there is freedom available. There is joy available. There is genuine, intimate connection available in relationships that honor God, is emotional intimacy with your spouse and with your Creator. There is healing. Female warriors, if you're battling with explicit content, let's call it what it is, and work your plan. And I want to speak to the women specifically for a moment on behalf of the men, to invite you into this fight, to fight alongside us, and sometimes on our behalf, because we need your help. Here's what's likely going to happen. At some point, there might be a confession, a husband to a wife, a friend to a friend, a son to a mother. And ladies, I know that if an important man in your life comes to you and says he's been struggling with this issue, your first reaction is probably going to be anger, fury, disgust. You might feel deeply insecure. You might wonder if you're not attractive enough, if you're not enough, period. You might feel betrayed, violated, furious. Every single one of those feelings is completely valid and justified. But I'm asking you, after you work through those feelings, across at that person and see not just some kind of perverted failure, but a warrior who's been wounded and loves you enough to ask for your help in the healing process. We need each other in this fight. I don't fight for purity alone, and neither should anyone else. Warriors, listen to me. You're not weak. You're not a victim. You don't take shortcuts. You deny yourself. You make sacrifices for what matters. You're a warrior, and warriors never surrender. Your mind will always be a battlefield. That's the reality. But you are its commander. You are not its slave. You control your mind. Your mind doesn't control you. Who are you? You're an overcomer. Through spiritual power, through confession, through community, you can do all things. You are more than a conqueror. The enemy isn't attacking you because you're weak. The enemy is attacking you because you're a warrior with a mission that threatens his kingdom. You have someone to protect. You have purposes to fulfill. You have battles to win. Yes, you may fail sometimes. Yes, you may fall. Yes, you may stumble. But when you do, you get back up and fight again because you're a warrior. A warrior may not win every single battle, but a warrior never stops fighting. And when you continue to fight with the support of other warriors, with the power of spiritual truth, with practical strategies and honest accountability, you will see victory. The ancient promise is that whom the Son sets free is free indeed. That means complete freedom, not just behavior modification, not just gritting your teeth and resisting temptation through sheer willpower, actual freedom where the desire itself begins to lose its power over you, where you're pursuing purity not out of fear or shame, but out of genuine desire for what's good and right and life-giving. I'm asking you to fight this battle with others, protecting one another, allowing God to heal the wounds that make you vulnerable, committing to honor Him in purity, and actually fighting the battles you're called to fight rather than being sidelined by this struggle. Let me paint you a picture of what life could look like on the other side of this battle. Imagine waking up in the morning without that immediate weight of shame. Imagine going through your day without constantly managing a secret. Imagine being in your relationship without that invisible barrier between you and your spouse. Imagine serving in your calling without feeling like a fraud. Imagine the mental energy you currently spend on this struggle being freed up for purposes that actually matter. That's not just a fantasy. When I work with people, that's a real possibility for people who are willing to fight with wisdom, honesty, and community support. I've seen it happen hundreds of times. I've watched people who were completely enslaved to these patterns experience genuine freedom. Not overnight, not through some magic prayer, but through sustained commitment to the process of healing. Let me be very specific about what confession looks like in practical terms, because this is where so many people get stuck. Confession to God is relatively easy. You can pray privately, admit your struggles, ask for forgiveness, and feel a sense of relief. But confession to other people is terrifying. It requires vulnerability that goes against every instinct. We have to protect our image and reputation. Tell you what effective confession to other people looks like. First, you need to choose the right people. Confess to someone who will use the information against you, who will gossip, who will shame you, isn't equipped to handle what you're sharing. Choose people who have demonstrated wisdom, who understand grace, who have their own struggles and therefore can relate to yours, and who are committed to supporting you rather than judging you. Second, be specific without being graphic. You don't need to describe every detail of your behavior. You do need to be honest about the nature and frequency of your struggle. Vague confessions lead to vague accountability. If you say, I sometimes struggle with purity, that doesn't give anyone enough information to actually help you. But if you say, I've been viewing explicit content several times a week for the past 6 months, usually late at night when I'm alone, that gives people concrete information they can work with. Third, request specific forms of help. What do you need? Do you need someone to check in with you daily? Do you need someone who will ask you direct questions about your behavior? Do you need someone who will help you set up technological barriers? Do you need someone who will meet with you weekly to pray and process? Be clear about what would actually help you. Fourth, be willing to accept consequences. If you're married and you confess to your spouse, may need time and space to process their feelings. If you confess to a spiritual leader, there may be temporary restrictions on your service or leadership. Accept these consequences as part of the healing process rather than viewing them as punishment. Now let's talk about removing triggers, because this is another area where people often fail to be specific enough. Identifying triggers requires brutal honesty about your patterns. Most people's patterns are remarkably consistent. You tend to struggle at certain times, in certain places, in certain emotional states. Maybe you consistently struggle late at night when you're tired and your defenses are down. If that's true, you need to have a specific plan for those late night hours. Maybe that means you don't keep your phone or computer in your bedroom. Maybe that means you set up accountability where someone checks your devices in the morning. Maybe that means you commit to going to bed earlier so you're not awake during your vulnerable hours. Maybe you consistently struggle when you're traveling. If that's the case, you need a travel plan. Maybe that means you always stay with a friend or family member when possible rather than in a hotel. Maybe that means you don't travel alone. Maybe that means you have scheduled check-ins with an accountability partner every evening when you're away. Maybe you consistently struggle when you're feeling lonely or rejected. If that's your pattern, you need to have alternative coping mechanisms ready. Instead of turning to explicit content when you feel lonely, maybe you call a friend, go to a public place, exercise, journal, pray,